Babysitters of Reddit. What seemingly normal parents had dark secrets? I nannied for this very rich family with 3 kids from the west coast who would come to South Florida for summer vacation every year. The mother was in her 30s. Clearly had her kids when she was young. And was very stereotypically hot blonde. Thin. Big bobs. Perfect teeth. Her husband was a little older. Salt and pepper. Super handsome. Very George Clooney-esque. The kids were all blonde haired. Blue eyed. Cute as duck. They absolutely adored their parents. Dad would help the kids and mom settle in at the house and then fly back to Cali for work. I babysat 3-5 times a week. 6:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. Mom would get all dolled up. Leave her wedding ring on the kitchen counter. And come home very late. Clearly drunk. And sometimes brought men home with her that she introduced as her friends. She would often overpay me. Which I never complained about. But I worried for the kids. My daddy hits my mommy sometimes. For that one. I was still in high school. I told my mom what she said and my mom went to the police station to report it. I like it when you're here. Not the other lady. She's mean and she makes me sit in the closet. This little girl was referring to her dad's girlfriend. I told the dad about it and never saw the girlfriend around again. And for some comic relief, my older brother and I play swords in the bathroom. Daddy taught us how, asked him to show me with his action figures what he meant. Expecting the worst. And he says look. And goes in his dad's closet and pulls out these giant foam swords. Hugh. Thankfully not all in the same house. I used to babysit for my next door neighbor who had an 8-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. I was 13 when I started babysitting for them and I knew off the bat the kids were an interesting duo. To say the least. And I have too many stories to tell from when I was watching them. We all went to school together. So when we got off the bus, we'd walk to their apartment and I'd watch them. Made sure we got homework done. And make them the snack of the day. One day, we had a half day at school. And I think the mom forgot. Because when we walked into the apartment, I heard one of the doors shut. At the time, we thought it was an intruder. So I grabbed the 5-year's baseball bat. Told them to stay in the room. And I'd do some investigating. I opened the bathroom door. And there was the mom. Half naked. With a guy that wasn't her husband. She gave me all the money in her wallet and her business card. She was a photographer. And told me to never speak of it again. I caught her cheating and made out with $400 and a $650 photo shoot package. Took pictures for all the upcoming holidays so I could keep giving gifts to my family. I babysat them for about 3 months after. Before they moved away. I was babysitting once and the kids were wrestling in the living room. All of a sudden the smell of dank filled the room. I hear the kids stop and say what is that? One of them had knocked over a big tin can on a shelf and the parents' wee dust ash spilled everywhere. I sent the kids away and cleaned it all up for them and put it back. I never really babysat for anyone besides family. But I did dog sit for a woman and her husband for a while. She gave me a tour of the house the first time I went over there and there was a room in the back of the house that was filled with dildos and other sex toys. She sold them as a side hustle and wanted me to know they were there in case I was uncomfortable. They paid me well and left a great review on the site I was using. I wish they never moved, lol. I love their dogs. That's nice that they had the forethought to show you the weird stuff they have so that you wouldn't feel uncomfortable if you found it by yourself. I babysit 3-5 times a week. You'd be surprised at how many sex toys I see. A lot of them are just out in the open. Like they forgot to hide them. I overnighted once and the guest bed had bondage straps. Parents totally forgot about that. That's not too surprising. But some of their kinks are. Probably the darkest was this 5-year-old girl I babysit. She was the victim of sexual assault for a couple years by an aunt and uncle. No charges pressed or anything. Mom and dad just cut all contact with that side of the family. I live in a small town so I see the aunt pretty often. It's sickening. They understandably have a ton of cameras set up in their house now and aren't gone for more than a couple hours. The child has a very weird bedtime routine, which is how I found out. Not so much as dark but really sad. I babysat for a typical upper middle class family. Dad worked, mom was stay at home. The mother was always a little overprotective, like checking on their daughter the second they got home. But I didn't think much of it. One night they came home and we talked a little. She mentioned how much she loved children and her daughter, so I asked her if they ever thought about having another. She completely broke down and explained that she had multiple miscarriages before and after her daughter, so they stopped trying. I felt really awful and really sad because it seems like she wanted another baby. I have found that so many women tell me about their kids or working on having kids. That even if it's a natural conversation point to ask about having kids, I won't. The risk that the answer would be hard for them is too high. If they want to talk about future kids, they'll tell me without being asked. I babysat a lot when I was 13-15. At the time I lived in a small town. I was a very popular babysitter as I also worked at the daycare center. Often I would have kids from 2 or 3 different families at once. I didn't care, I got triple the pay for having 3 different groups of kids. I was recently told why I always had groups of kids like that. Turns out the small town had a swingers club and I was the go-to babysitter for their different groups. I was babysitting for my neighbors. And they were super nice people. To kids. Very Pottery Barn people. They would always come home late. With no cash to pay me. But they'd come by my house literally the next day with the cash. So I never minded. But I was always a little confused as to how they spent all their cash at dinner and a movie and somehow didn't plan to pay the sitter. And how they managed to stay out till 3 AM just doing dinner and a movie, and they were pretty wealthy. So it wasn't like a waiting till payday thing. Once before they left, when they were in the other room saying goodbye to the kids, I went to move the wife's purse and saw a really big roll of singles. I brushed it off. But then another time their daughter had an allergic reaction and I texted them a sauce. When I got a call back, I picked up and heard club music. It was a couple sittings after that. When I left through the back door and saw the husband in the garage, shaking glitter off their clothes, that I realized they were probably going to a strip club. When I went to college, they switched to using my sister as a sitter. And I sat down with her and explained where they went and not to ask or act suspicious. They were good parents. And it's not like a problem. It was just super not the vibe they gave off and I kinda found it hilarious. I was babysitting for a local family who owned car dealerships. I answered the phone hello as one does, and it was the father who didn't know his wife had hired a babysitter so she could go to an appointment. He started in with the stupidest sexy voice until he realized it wasn't wife. He hung up. Later he was caught cheating. I used to nanny for a family. At the interview they seemed totally normal. Even the first day wasn't too terrible. I quickly realized that both parents were abusive. Mom had severe anger issues and was medicated for some condition related to it. Dad was a borderline sexual predator who constantly talked about how gross looking his wife was and how if she didn't stop being a rick, he'd divorce her. Their kids were just as bad. One of them was also medicated for behavioral issues. I found out later that the reason they were hiring a nanny opposed to daycare was because their kids had been kicked out of the daycares in the area. Nope, the duck out of that situation within a few months. I never personally babysat. But I was watching a video on the internet and the seemingly normal parents came home and had sex with the babysitter. I nannied for a wealthy couple. She was a surgeon. He was an architect. And the husband had a study in the house that the wife joked about never being allowed in. Now, I'm a nosy ducker. And I was curious about why you wouldn't let someone in a study. Since it looked like a fairly normal room. Big desk. Walls covered in bookshelves. Books of architecture everywhere. So one day I just roamed around in there. I didn't really find anything. And I was kinda disappointed. But then I grabbed a book off one of the shelves. The thing had money pressed between its pages, about $500. If I had to guess. Picked up another book. Found the same thing. I think I checked like 10 different books. And every single one had money hidden in it. Still not sure if the dude was just paranoid about banks or if he was intentionally hiding money from his wife. Edit. Hey BuzzFeed. Duck you. I babysat for the local policeman when I was teenager. He always came home very drunk and in a weird mood, and one time brought out a homemade Ouija board and persuaded me to take part with his buddies. Always paid me really well. Edit to clarify. A family member of mine was a babysitter in the 70s. A couple who lived nearby asked her to babysit their baby a few times. I didn't get the sense that she knew them well. Every time she'd go they said the baby was sleeping and not to disturb the baby by checking on it. The baby never cried. The parents would come home and relieve her. She never saw or heard a baby. At the time I don't think my family member thought much of it, but has told me this story several times because it keeps nagging at her. How could a baby be asleep for the entire time she was there? Every time. No noises. Nothing. Today. She thinks there must not have been a baby but has no idea why they'd hire her. I was babysitting at my neighbor's house. They were a young couple, early 30s, with 2 kids aged 5 and 8. I was 16 at the time and the first questions they asked me was if I had a boyfriend and if I was a virgin. Because they didn't want me seeing boys while babysitting. I think part of the reason why they asked this is because they were pretty wild themselves and probably did crazy stuff when they were younger and babysitting. When they found out I smoked, they always left some cigarettes for me. They always told me that they'd be home around 12 or 1. But most of the times I would fall asleep and they would stumble home completely drunk around 3 in the night. They'd give me way too much money as an excuse, which I obviously didn't mind. After a while the dad started messaging me online. First just asking innocent questions, but after a while they became more sexual in nature. I told him I didn't feel comfortable with that, so he stopped. They broke up a while later and the mom started throwing wild parties at their home. I randomly walked by with a friend of mine once and she invited us in and gave us a beer. Me and my friend felt pretty cool. Here we were at a grown-up party, having beers, until the mom came up to us to offer us some coke. We were shocked and declined and left the party quickly after that. I told my parents a couple of years later about all this, after the mom and kids moved, and they were outraged. Apparently they always acted like they were very respectable. When I was 13-14ish, I used to babysit 2 kids while their parents went to Amway functions. One night, for whatever reason, I looked behind the couch and saw a bunch of magazines. I collected them, thinking they'd been dropped behind there by accident by the kids I babysat. It was a huge stash of Penthouse and Playboy magazines and I had to quickly re-hide them before the kids saw them. I was curious, naturally, but I told the mom when she drove me home. I don't recall if she said anything or not, but I stopped babysitting her kids shortly after that because I moved away. I used to babysit when I was around 13-14ish. My neighbors and 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 11. The house was really nice, always clean and tidy. One time they asked me to babysit for a couple hours. Okay, no big deal. They paid me $6 an hour. When I got there they made the kids shake my hand and say thank you for babysitting us. I thought it was weird but it was whatever. The parents left and the kids wanted those dinosaur chicken nuggets, so I made them some. As they were eating, the 7-year-old asked for a toy. She said it was in her parents' dresser. I didn't want to snoop around, but if she wanted the toy, I get it for her. I went into the parents' room and found the dresser. I opened the first one and all I see are stacks of cash. Okay. Weird but not my business. I went back out to ask the girl what dresser drawer it was in. She goes over and literally points at the second drawer and said, "Oh, don't open that one. It has bags of sugar in it." That's what I hear mommy say. I was like, oh. Okay then. She grabs her toy from the 4th drawer and runs off. I did take a peek in the drawer and sure enough, under the socks were bags of coke. I was shocked, but I didn't say anything. I put everything back where it was and left the room. When the parents got back, I took the cash and left. Never babysat there again. TLDR, babysat some kids and found coke in the parents' drawer. Somewhat wholesome story. I used to babysit for the kids down the street when I was in high school. One night I went into the parents' bedroom to get something, I think a puzzle, and there was a book on the nightstand called How to Comfort Your Kids When You're Thinking of Divorce or something like that. The next time I was over, there was a book downstairs, on the mom's desk, that was the couple's therapist's guide to saving a failing relationship. It made me sad because the parents seemed really happy together whenever I saw them. I felt bad that they must have been going through a hard time behind the scenes. My parents had a pretty unhappy marriage, so I tried to be extra nice to the kids. I hope they hadn't had to listen to their parents fighting. Anyway, this went on for a few months with no further indications of trouble. I felt like I knew this awful secret that the kids didn't know. One night I came over to babysit. The mom was in grad school and she had a class and the same books were sitting on the counter. As the mom was leaving, she was like, "Oh, I can't forget the textbooks," and grabbed them off the counter. I actually didn't know what she was studying, so I asked what class she had. Turns out she was studying to be a couples and family therapist. The books I saw were her school books. In retrospect, that made complete sense because the titles were kind of academic. But I immediately assumed they were divorcing. About a decade later, they are still married and the wife is a very successful couples and family therapist. Go figure. One family, I still don't know what was up with them. It's like they were squatting in a model home or something. It was a fully furnished house that looked to be straight out of Better Homes and Gardens magazine. But there was nothing in the drawers, fridge or cabinets. No toiletries in the bathroom except for toilet paper. No food or silverware in the kitchen. No clothes in the closets or in the kids' drawers, and no toys. The lady just told me to order food for the kids and they watched TV. It was weird. Work in an elementary school. A lot of horrifying, unexpected stuff tends to come up. I handle any behavioral calls, so tend to have a lot of contact with kids who are having trouble self-regulating in school. Sometimes these kids genuinely have a hard time, but often they can't regulate because they are in hyperdrive with what's going on at home. I had a mom tell me, in detail, the sex life between her and her ex. Another parent was arrested for drug trafficking and went to jail for 3 years a week after he'd attended parent-teacher conferences. Another parent got into a fight in the lobby and 911 had to be called.